really, I'm supposed to have my doctorate, so I'm the underachiever of the family.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I haven't done exactly what I was supposed to do. But yeah, one of the main things for my father and the reason why he emphasizes education is he feels like you should want to know anything that you're doing, you should want to know as much as you possibly can and be the sponge. And then you wring out what you don't need, but sponge and absorb and being it helps with people and management. There's so many things about it of why he emphasized it so much. But yeah, we have great expectations in our households.
Yeah. I'd hardly say that you were the underachiever of your family. So, with love and respect, shut up.
I know. Well, now he's okay. He thought I'd be a theater bum, but haha, showed you, Dad.
Yeah. Welcome to Right for the Role, the podcast. I'm your host, John Frank Levey. Thanks for joining me as I sit down with my friends and colleagues to explore their journeys to discover the roles they are right for professionally and personally. As you listen, it's my greatest hope you'll find inspiration and motivation to embrace the roles in your life you were always meant to play. And now it's a tremendous pleasure for me to introduce my guest today, Shanola Hampton, who, like me, got her start in the TV business in a casting office. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But luckily for both of us, Shanola's career didn't end there. We first met when I cast her as Veronica on Shameless. From the star-making turn, Shanola is now winning rave reviews as the series lead of the acclaimed procedural drama Found. Other roles she's proven to be right for include beloved daughter, loving sister, dedicated wife, and doting mother. You know, the title of my book and my podcast is Right for the Role. And when I first met you, you just made me do a backflip, which is hard for me to do, because you were so right for Veronica that I couldn't see anybody else. I mean, we had other people come in after you, but I kept thinking of you the whole time. In some ways, your rightness for V, it was the most right of anybody I've ever cast in any part. And
Oh,
that brings me to a question, because your spirit and your quality, your essence is so bright and shining and
yeah.
charismatic, uh, uh, and winning. And now you're playing a really dark, hard role. And I wondered how, maybe it could even be said that you're playing a role that you're not essentially right for.
Right.
And how are you doing it?
Oh gosh, that's crazy. Well, it is it was so important to me to do something that was not Veronica when I chose my next project. We had the luxury, as you know, of doing something for 11 seasons. And I think what happens in everybody's mind, you can be put into a box of what you
Sure.
think that they can do. So I was actually looking for something that was the opposite. Training, this is the gift that God gave me. I'm really hell bent on everybody staying in their lane. And I believe writers write, and I just say the words. So it's all there for me to just deliver what they have already beautifully written. And once you sort of put on that wardrobe and you read the script, you just feel the role. It doesn't really matter how dark or the comedy, whichever you're doing. Once you have that person down and you get them, then you just kind of do it. So I mean, you know me, I'm in between takes. I'm singing and I'm dancing and I'm
Yeah.
partying. And so what's funny would be what the people don't get to see is when I dip down into my lower register and I am Gabby Mosley. 10 seconds before that, I was probably twerking on a table.
Well, that's fantastic. And I read somewhere, Trudy does some wonderful research for me, and I read somewhere that you don't like to rehearse this
No.
stuff and that you don't really prepare that in a certain way. And it's not by no means is it laziness, but it's your process is that you just jump in and trust what happens between you and the other actors, and trust what the writers do. And that's a great faith you have in everybody doing their job. And that makes it impossible for you to not do yours.
I think that's right. And I think a lot of it comes from, honestly, the training that we did have when we did Shameless and working with someone like John Wells. What people don't usually experience is a set that doesn't have sides. And so you should come and work prepared and ready to just play. And one of the reasons why, I mean, you do the rehearsals, but one of the reasons why I don't really love rehearsing is because I like for the audience to feel the organic responses to certain things. You're going to do a lot of takes anyway. So if there is something that needs to be tweaked, of course you can do that. But I'd like to feel like for the actors that we, especially when I'm working with someone like Mark Paul, where our chemistry was just automatic, for Found, and Steve Howie for Shameless. You could sometimes meet those actors that you don't need to rehearse, you just want to be able to play. And so my process is very much, I can look at the script and I know my lines, and then I just want to go for it.
That's fantastic. It also speaks that each of us have our own process, and it's unique to us, and we come to it in an organic way. I don't think I cast the same way other people do. I've often said that I'm a vibist. A friend of mine said, that's someone who plays the vibraphone. You don't know what you're talking about. But to me, it's someone who gets you. I pride myself on getting you. And that instinct, I don't think I could do my job if someone cut off my instinctive way of doing things.
Well, I think that's what always made you so special as a casting director. Like, even getting into the room with you, there is a certain reputation that you carry of you are no nonsense, and you are going to say whatever feedback. It was back in the day. So much has changed now, but it's back in the day when you would go into the room and actually see the casting director, then agents would call for feedback, and you would actually be one of the casting directors that would give feedback, but it would be very, very honest feedback. So you knew if you championed me specifically, that meant something, because you don't just go around championing everyone. But I'm a lot to get too, right? So for you to be able to see and get the essence of who I am, for other people it would have been too big, too broad, she's a lot, all of those things. But you were able to look past what that initial response is and to see what came to be such a wonderful, iconic character because of the show.
I
And
remember
that
the
says a lot
first,
about you.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I remember the first time we met, right after you left the room. Melanie Burgess was my associate in those days. And I said to her, I think I finally understand why OBGYNs have a nurse in the room all the time. Because you are a lot.
Yeah.
And that is by no means an insult. That's,
No.
you're so vividly colorful and wonderful. You know what? One of the things I remember about our first meeting is that you didn't really have an agent.
I was,
You were
yes,
what's called a hip pocket client of somebody at a big agency. How did that come to be?
it was such a weird time, like transition time. I've been with my same manager, Alyssa Leeds at Real Talent for 30, almost 25 years. And I was in between agents and trying to figure out like what it looked like, where I should go. And I was met with an assistant really at a large agency, and they were rising up in this large agency, and they just really liked who I was just from the meeting, and they hip pocketed me, and Shameless came along during that period of transition, and it worked out to be kind of amazing. I mean, I had agents before, but the thing about it is as you go to different levels in your career, as much as you want to stay and be loyal, people don't serve you at each step. And you realize there is a disconnect. And so then you have to move on. And you can't be afraid of that. You can't be afraid to not have representation for a period of time, or to, move past relationships that no longer serve you.
Absolutely. And, I've always said to young actors that having the illusion of representation is much worse than having no representation.
Absolutely.
Because
Absolutely.
you still have the freedom to change. Another thing that's really changed for you, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit about it. When you were on Shameless, you were number, I don't know what, on the call sheet. It doesn't
7,
matter.
8, something like that. Yep.
Something like that. And you were definitely a member of the ensemble and a very important character, and it evolved into more and more of an important character about in so many ways. But now you've transitioned and you're number one on the call
Yeah.
sheet. And I remember very well that during the course of Shameless, you took on the responsibility of taking care of those children who
Yeah.
started at 7 and 8 and 15 or 16 or 17.
Yeah.
And you really took it on your own, and you I think you probably developed the capacity that you already innately had to be the leader and to become number one on the call sheet. I certainly recognized that was not going to be a gamble, that was going to be as close to a certainty as we get in this crazy business that we're in. But what has the transition been like to go from 7 or 8 to 1?
Yeah. It's interesting. On a day-to-day basis, it feels exactly the same as what I've done in other projects because, as you know from the show, I'm Mama Bear, and that's what they still refer to me as, and sort of where the presence lies. So the day-to-day on the set feels exactly the way it did. I always say I'm number one in the producer, on the ground producer of my new show, but I feel like I've been playing that role without the paycheck for all of my career. I'm just finally getting a paycheck for it. So that part, the difference, I think, John, is the pressure. And it is the weight of feeling, whether it's true or not, that you are responsible for everyone's jobs, for lack of a better word. You're responsible to make sure that the show is a success because, generally speaking, there could be a lot of factors why a show is not successful. But when you are the face so much of a show, if it's not successful, it kind of falls on you. And being a woman of color and natural hair and on network TV, all of those responsibilities are weighted on me in a very different way than when you can just kind of come in and do your thing and leave. And the other thing is, there are no real days off for number one. When you have a day off, you're doing press, you're doing, there is never really an actual break. And that is something that I didn't recognize because, Emmy and Bill would take the brunt of that and, doing the talk shows and all of the other stuff that now the world just changes beyond talk shows. You're always doing some sort of press. And so that it's a lot of time, and it's not a lot of time that is for self.
Yeah, absolutely. And because you're not only a mama bear on the set, you're a mama bear at home, and you have a wonderful husband and a successful long-term marriage. And I've heard you talk about him. I wish any woman in my life would talk about me like that.
This is the best.
And two wonderful children. And I remember seeing you posting. You took a family trip to Europe last year and to Asia as well?
Yeah, we went to Japan and then we went to South Korea. We're going to Singapore and Bali this year, but we do all of that. And my show shoots in Atlanta and I live in LA. So I was flying home every single weekend to be with my kids. It is a sacrifice for the whole family and it's a lot of miles. But yeah, that balance is not for the weak.
No, absolutely. And, I talked about this with another guest that I've already had an interview with, but in some ways, it's not really possible to have it all at the same time. When you're in Atlanta, you're Shanola Hampton, the actress, number one on the call sheet, the producer. And when you're home, you're Shanola, the wife and the mother. And it's hard to bring those worlds together and it may be an unreasonable expectation. And I think it's especially hard for women in show business or in any pressurized uh, professional life who also have a family.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly when this interview that we're doing now is going to drop. No, look at me using fancy tech terms.
Look at you.
But
When will it drop? Go ahead,
uh,
John Levey.
but you just had Thanksgiving with your family. Did you cook anything?
Yeah, well, my family. So when we talk about my family, we have the family that's in the house, but you've known me for a really long time. My family is quite large, and some would call us a cult. So we do everything together there in South Carolina. And so we all met in Houston, where my niece is doing her last year of law school, and we got a nice house on the lake. And I cooked the sweet potato pie and two of them, which were delicious. It might have been my best ever. And then I did the brunch, which I do this crazy croissant French toast, which everybody dies for. It's fantastic. And so I did a big brunch, and that was all I cooked because I just got finished working, and I told them I'm taking a break.
And family and faith and food are so important in your life. I've seen your Instagram, and somebody, I think maybe it was your mother-in-law who made something that I was like, ooh,
What was it? Banana
Shanola,
pudding?
damn it, I don't want any credit for your career, but would you invite me to dinner when your
It probably
mother-in-law is
was.
cooking?
Yes, we love cooking.
Yeah, that's great. You have sisters, yeah? More
Yes.
than one?
I do. I have three sisters. They're all pretty much and cousins, and everybody is pretty much in the education field. And so we grew up four girls in the house and one bathroom for us to share.
Uh-huh. And you moved from Long Island as a little girl to the South, and I think of you as very much a Southern girl. And I think that I was at one time in my life married to a Southern girl, and so I know something about that. Um, but education was a giant part of your family's expectations of each other, and you got an advanced degree in acting, but your sisters, some of them got advanced degrees in pretty esoteric and complicated things. Can you
Yeah,
tell us a
yeah.
little
We
bit
have
about your
three
sisters?
doctorates in our family now that we just celebrate with along with my stuff. So we have my dad is, I was going to say was, but is very big on education. And no matter what you decide you want to do, whatever field that was, you had to do a higher than college level. That was the expectation. It just really was. Really, I'm supposed to have my doctorate, so I'm the underachiever of the family.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I haven't done exactly what I was supposed to do. But yeah, one of the main things for my father and the reason why he emphasizes education is he feels like you should want to know anything that you're doing, you should want to know as much as you possibly can and be the sponge. And then you wring out what you don't need, but sponge and absorb and being it helps with people and management. There's so many things about it of why he emphasized it so much. But yeah, we have great expectations in our households.
Yeah. Yeah, my mom was was the first woman to get a PhD from Columbia University in the hard sciences in the 40s before she had my brother and I. So I'm aware of hard choices and big demands and big expectations. I'd hardly say that you were the underachiever of your family. So with love and respect, shut up.
I know. Well, now he's okay. He thought I'd be a theater bum, but haha, showed you, Dad.
Yeah. I hate having my picture taken. I always have. I'm so uncomfortable being the center of attention, I guess, that I always make funny faces. And there's a famous picture of me as a hippie with an orange traffic cone on my head. Imagine that. When it came time to have a picture taken for the flap of my memoir, Right for the Role, I was introduced to a photographer named Eusebio Hernandez. And he made me feel so comfortable and relaxed that we got a great shot. If you're looking for headshots, I strongly recommend that you contact Eusebio Hernandez, and his contact information is available on the show notes. speaking of your charisma and your uh, career, when did you get the idea that you might have a creative life?
When I was 5.
And can you tell us a little bit about
It's the
where that
craziest
came from?
thing because I mean, John, there wasn't a lot of people that looked like me on television. So it wasn't that. It's so it's crazy for a young girl in the South, dark skin, to even say that they want to be an actress. It's not a thing that is so I can only describe it as a believer, as a God thing. That's the only way that I can describe it. Or whatever you believe in, universe, something, a feeling inside you that doesn't really make sense, but it feels right. And then I had a minister sort of in our community really ordained me, called me out of where I was sitting. He was in the pulpit, and I'm sitting in church, and they called me up to the front, and basically around that age, between 5 and 8 years old, said that this was what I would do and that I would impact people through my gifts as an artist and
Wow.
as an actor. And I rely on that imagery of being called up every time that I would get the nose, and every time I was crying in my car, and every time I would make myself ill from not getting the role because I was the almost girl for so many years. I would almost get there. I would test for so many things. I would be the only Black person testing against, characters that were not written for Black people. And I would not get it. And I get so sick and I would have to replay it. He said it. It must be true. I can feel it. It must be true. And that's really, so where it came from, I don't know. I just know that I've never not felt this was what I was supposed to do.
It's so great that as a person who it doesn't have the level of faith that you have and hasn't had that kind of an experience in a religious room. I had that kind of an experience in a theater as a little boy, where I kind of went, I didn't know that I was lost, but I was sort of lost, just the way a lot of little boys are, where you're just kind of bouncing around from one thing to the next, and you don't really have any through line or any thrust or any identity yet. And I was in a theater that my mother took me to, and there was a little play going on, and there was a young 7-year-old African American dark skinned girl with natural hair on the stage. Maybe it was you. Um, I don't think it was, but
No,
it could easily have been. And it was a monologue about desegregating an elementary school and being the first Black kid to go to that school. And at a certain point in the middle of the monologue, the young actress lost her place, and she called out, "Line," and the stage manager threw her the line, and then she went on, and she never broke. And I thought to myself, this is magic. And wouldn't it be fun to be in a room like this with a girl like that and other
yeah.
and um maybe maybe I recognized you from that experience in a funny way.
I think that that's it. I think that, many would say, you say church is a church for me comes in theater. And, that is another place wherever you are and the universe begins to speak to you. That to me is like church.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there's something very similar about what we do to church, to temple, to a mosque, and to any of those religious buildings, because we're exploring what it means to be a person
That's right.
on the planet at the time that the story is being told from. And it's our responsibility. I mean, I think, not to get too horrifyingly political in our present moment, but just to say that it's our responsibility to tell the stories of our times in a way that will educate people, that will make people laugh and make people cry and make people think, and that those are all, that's a 25 million year old art. It's been going on for forever for people, and it's a big responsibility, even maybe bigger than being number one on the call sheet.
I agree with that wholeheartedly.
You talked about yourself as a young, dark-skinned kid who didn't see themselves on film and television at the time that you were a little girl. The timing of your rise to success is so wonderful that now, is it Lorraine Hansberry who said to be young, gifted, and black? And it's finally true that it's an advantage to be young, gifted, and black, and maybe not quite so young.
Yeah.
But the timing for your success has just been so great, and now a little black girl in some small town in North Carolina or Georgia or Mississippi or New Jersey or Connecticut can look and see you. When I watched Found for the first time, I was on an airplane going to Hawaii, and I saw the first 2 episodes of the first season, and I thought, damn, look at Shanola. And they got you in such great clothes. And
Thank you.
do you have a lot of input in the way you look?
Yeah. We styling is so important anyway, but especially for me. But so yeah, I get a lot of input. But they had it pretty right. I don't have to shoot a lot of stuff down. They bring it in. They know what my expectations are. Shoes being number one.
Back in the days when we started Shameless, and you were the only black
Yes.
series regular on
Yes.
the show.
Yes.
Did you have a special hair person who understood black hair?
No, I wasn't. That's one of the biggest things that happens for people of color in our industry is hair and makeup and the understanding of. I ended up getting later on, not too many seasons, and Nikki Smith, who is with me now on Found as well, that
Good.
she really made herself learn dreadlocks and made herself very versed and really made it the artistry that it is and wasn't afraid of it. So I was blessed to get her later on to understand it and to really dive in and to try to make styling. So I didn't have that on Shameless, no.
But you do now.
I definitely have it now. Nikki is along with me, Jory as well.
Great.
They are and then I have other girls now that ladies that really have been doing locticians, as they would call it, for a while. So yeah, that it's really nice to have now.
Did you ever see the documentary that Chris Rock does the narration of, Good Hair?
Oh yes, I have.
My son did some post work on that.
Oh,
And I watched it, and it is funny, touching, and from a white man's perspective, it's informative.
very informative. Exactly.
We've talked a little bit about race already, but can you tell me, talk a little bit about the transition from the time that you started in the business and what it's like now as compared to what it was like then for a talented, vivacious, colorful woman of color?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because the business has changed so much and the opportunities that we're afforded now were definitely not there when I began. One of the things that I will say about my manager, who's still my manager to this day, Alyssa Leeds, is she never looked at breakdowns and paid any attention to what they said for ethnicity, ever. She always thought outside the box. And she always fought for me to be seen in roles that were not necessarily written to be me. And I was able to break down some of those walls as I was coming. Ultimately, they would go with whoever they want, but I would make it really far in the process and make them wonder, well, maybe this could be. And I would test in against all these, the white girl, and they were just to give that planted seed of maybe this could go, a different way. And she was when I started out in the business, there were 2 roles that we could play: the best friend and the assistant, at the time called secretary. Those were the roles that they saw us as all the time. It would have never been Gabby Mosley, ever, because Gabby Mosley, just what the hero character just didn't look like us. That's not what it was. But could I be Gabby Mosley's best friend? Absolutely. And so when I think about where we've come from and in the business and being able to show that we can carry these shows and tell these stories, because Gabby Mosley really could be anyone, right? We just have to see that women of color can hold their own. And I think now we've seen that in a real way. And that makes me really excited. And when I say women of color, I'm not just speaking about Black women. I'm speaking about Latinas. I'm speaking about Asian, like all of the stories and the depth that we have as colorful people to be able to show that in this way has been really great. But we still, I want to make sure that folks don't get comfortable in saying, oh, now is the time for diversity, because we still have such a long way to go. Because let's be clear, there's not a shortage of Caucasians on television. You're not suddenly turning your TV screen and like, there is just more than what we had, but there is still a huge gap.
But I mean, my experience with people of color is that storytelling has been an important part of your cultures. In the indigenous Native Americans and certainly in the African American community through song and through storytelling. It's just been the idea that you should be excluded instead of included is just stupid, because you're some of our best storytellers. Excuse me, your character's name is Mosley, and my favorite novelist alive today is half Black, half Jewish Walter Mosley. And when I met him, because he had something in development with John Wells Productions, and I said to him, "Oh, Mr. Mosley, it's such an honor to meet you. I've read everything you've written." And he said, "That's a lot of reading, kid."
I love that.
Yeah. So Mosley is a wonderful name for an important Black person.
Yeah.
I wanted to jump to another thing, and you're on network television now, so your things are different. But when you were on Showtime on Shameless, there was nudity and simulated sex, and you and Steve Howie, who played Kev, were having nudity and simulated sex before there were intimacy coordinators.
Sure.
And so you pretty much had to work it out yourselves and learn to trust each other. Can you talk a little bit about how you and Steve managed that, and also what the transition was like when suddenly there was somebody there to help you with it? And did they help you, or did they make it more difficult in some ways?
Well, our show was a really long time. So it started one way, and by the end, we had babies and things were completely different.
Yeah.
By the time the intimacy coordinator came in, one thing I'll say is working with John Wells is he is very clear about making sure that you are comfortable with things. There were two things that I knew. Well, there was one main thing that I knew I would never show. I would never show my bottom area. So if you think back to any episode, there is nothing that you see my bottom, not my booty, nothing at all. I knew that I was going to just be topless. That's what my comfort level was. And on a show like Shameless, where, it is real, everybody's nude, that was a major boundary for me not to show that part, but that was my boundary. And John respected that completely. And Steve respected that completely. So I always had on full underwear as opposed to the little peekaboos because you couldn't see it. Steve and I are best friends. And we became best friends. A lot of the reason why we became best friends and are to this day is because of his protection of me during those scenes. So there would be times that if I wasn't feeling comfortable here, he would just put his hand there so then you don't even see anything, but it looks like a complete intimate scene. And we would sort of choreograph where our mood was for each scene. And sometimes it just was a free for all because we were so comfortable with one another. So by the time the intimacy coordinator came in to answer that question, I had already been on the toilet with a real, for real pregnant belly, and we weren't really doing. Look ahead, and you remember we weren't really doing that many sex scenes by that time. And one thing that people don't realize about Steve Howie and I is we didn't do like kissing on the lips. You think that we had all these intimate sessions, and we did, but there was never like lip to lip touch because we were both, me more than him. I made him one, germaphobes. So there's kissing on necks. There's like all of these things, but there's never actual and intimate kissing scene. So those are like little tricks that you find when you find a partner that you trust.
Yeah,
I do think
so
intimacy coordinators are important. I don't want to.
no, absolutely, because
Yeah.
there are some people who don't have that mutual respect, and that, and the director says action, and some stupid person thinks that that call gives them permission to do all sorts of things that haven't been discussed or planned, and that has happened for forever. And intimacy coordinators are an important kind of referee to make
Mhm.
sure that that's not an
Mhm.
improv, that's a,
Mhm.
you wouldn't do a fight scene
Right.
without planning it, because someone could get hurt, and a sex scene, someone can get hurt in a much more subtle way than getting punched in the nose by accident.
Right. Right.
You talked about John Wells and the way he treats actors, and I am so lucky to have spent literally almost all of my career working for one person. I've referred to my career as a marriage, whereas most casting directors have affairs. Um, and you talked, and I would love it if you would talk again about the experience of transitioning to directing and the opportunity that John gave you, and the process of you shadowing Silvertree and others. Mark Mylod was around, I think, as well. And then it was such a pleasure to have you, the director, in my room, instead of you, the actress, in my room. And not every actor knows how to talk to other actors. Even somebody as fabulous as W.H. Bill Macy, who's maybe the most unsung actor of his generation, and maybe the best actor of his generation in America,
Agreed.
I think.
Yeah, agreed.
But he didn't always uh, talk to actors as openly and freely as you did.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, he had a high expectation for their, but you really got down in the mud with them. How was that? And do you plan? Have you directed Found yet?
I was supposed to direct this last season, but it just was a lot more. You have to. One of the things that I don't believe in for me in my career is hyphenating just for hyphenation's sake. It needs to be to serve and to feel like you are going to be a service to someone. And because of my workload as number one on that show, there wouldn't have been a lot of prep time, which means that
Yeah.
it would have just affected everything. And I owed it to the crew not to stretch myself that way, just because of the way. Hopefully, if we are picked up for season 3, we'll be able to write it better to where I will have the appropriate amount of time to really be able to prep and to direct. So directing is probably my first passion, if I'm being honest. Having someone like John Wells, I will say, there's so many things that I could say about John Wells, and having him be really the bulk of my career building, right? I would work for him every day for the rest of my life
Me too.
and be more than happy. There is no leader that can command without being commanding, and set an expectation that everyone abides by without any pushback because it's right.
Yeah. You know, he creates something that is so important to me, and I think to you as well, and that is community and collaboration and respect. And it really takes a village to make a television show, or a film or a play or any storytelling art. And if we're in competition, And if we're exercising our need for attention, or if we're doing anything that undercuts the development of community and collaboration and respect, it's going to negatively impact the product.
Absolutely.
And it's been one of the things that happened on Shameless, and I hold John greatly responsible for that. But at the same time, I honor you and Bill and so many others for, I mean, those were kids. I mean, they were children. Uh, I remember when the young man who came on to play the youngest Gallagher,
Christian.
Christian, and at his first table reading, he kept looking over at his mother, going, "Is it okay that I'm sitting here? That I heard him say
Yeah.
that?"
Yeah.
Because they're
Yeah.
they're a devout family,
Yeah.
and that was quite a transition. But you guided him into that community in the same way that you took care of the particularly, I guess, Emma,
Nathan.
who was your
Still is
darling.
my
Uh,
daughter.
uh,
Yeah.
it's such an honor to work with people who believe in community and collaboration and who care about respect, and I think uh, any team sport, and what we do is a team sport. It really depends on that cohesion and that collaboration. I think I just made this.
It really does. And there's no greater appreciation for the safe place that was created, and that John Wells and in the community that he works with create. You, when you are not there anymore, is when you realize how rare that kind of community and that kind of, as artists, everyone wants to feel safe. That's how I approach my directing. That's how I approach guest stars when they come in, and co-stars. And John makes it safe to be an artist on his sets. That's just, I will forever, I would work for John Wells the rest of my life and be happy. I really
Yeah.
would.
Yeah, but
Um,
because the environment, it's just so, it gives you the opportunity to do excellent work, to
there you go.
participate in
There you go.
excellence, and to look across the table at the concept meeting and know that Lynn Paolo is
That's
going
right.
to dress people
That's
beautifully,
right.
and
That's right.
that everybody's going to do their job,
That's
and
right. A trust, a
yeah,
trust, a
exactly.
trust for that. Yeah. So that was, so I couldn't imagine having a better opportunity than to learn from the great John Wells when it came to directing and Silvertree and all. But let me tell you something. People don't realize that you're not just, John is not one of those, just because you're an actor on my show, you're going to have the opportunity to direct. That is not it at all. He doesn't give anything. And as a matter of fact, he will look at you and be like, "Are you sure?" Because the experiences are that actors are generally going to go pick an acting job for the money or whatever, then direct, and kind of look at directing as a side thing. And that's not what he's trying to build.
No.
And so he was very clear about that. And then for him to allow me the opportunity to show him that I also was very serious about it, and to be able to do what I think was a really great episode for him in our final season, it meant and still means more to me. That is my number one passion, is directing, but stuff
And
that I want to direct.
when we, after our first casting session with you as the director, not the shadow director, but the actual director, when you left the room afterwards, Kim Wong and Tawny Tamietti, who are my two fabulous associates, I know you love them too.
Yes.
Um, we looked at each other and went, "She's going to do it. She's going to make it. She's going to be a director." Whereas other people who direct for the first time, you can sort of smell, "Oh man, they're over their heads."
Yeah, right,
they're
right.
gonna
Thank you. Yes,
they're
yes.
gonna take rescuing. Shanola, it's such a pleasure and it was hard won to get an opportunity to find you for an hour,
Please, I'm
and
sorry.
I'm grateful for you making this time available. I always like to end these interviews with a little game that my mother used to play with me when I was a little boy. She said, I was Johnny then, she would say, Johnny, say 3 words that describe who you are. Shanola, say 3 words that describe Shanola Hampton.
Vivacious, kind, passionate.
Yeah, those are the 3 I would have checked. You're an absolute delight, and we're so grateful to have you on Right for the Role, the podcast.
Right
Thank
for the
you
role.
for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you. I'm so proud of you. So happy to be here. Nothing I wouldn't do for you, John Levey. You know that.